The rain hammered against the windshield as Daniel Martinez gripped the steering wheel of his aging Toyota Camry, squinting through the downpour at the address on his phone. 3 years ago, he had been teaching literature at a community college, discussing the beauty of words and their power to connect souls. Now he was driving strangers through the streets of Houston at midnight, counting every dollar to keep his daughter's medical treatments going. His phone chimed with a new ride request from the Galleria area. Pick up at the Four Seasons. Daniel sighed and accepted it. Hotels meant luggage and small talk, and tonight his heart was too heavy for either. Earlier that evening, the hospital had called about Emma's latest test results. The experimental treatment she desperately needed would cost $200,000, and his insurance had denied the claim for the third time. He pulled up to the grand entrance where a man in his 60s stood alone beneath the overhang, rain creating a curtain around him. The man wore an elegant navy suit despite the late hour, and carried himself with a quiet dignity that caught Daniel's attention. As the passenger settled into the back seat, Daniel caught his reflection in the rearview mirror. The man's eyes held a deep sadness that somehow mirrored his own. Daniel started driving toward the address in River Oaks, and silence filled the car except for the rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers. Then he heard it, a soft sound from the back seat. The man was crying, trying to muffle the sobs but failing. Daniel's instinct as a teacher, as a father, as a human being kicked in. He couldn't just ignore another person's pain. Without thinking, he spoke in Arabic, the language his grandmother had taught him during childhood summers in her kitchen, the language that had become his secret comfort during his own darkest moments. Yo aki hal anta bikar. Brother, you all right? The man's head lifted sharply. For a moment, there was only the sound of rain. Then, in Arabic, the passenger responded, his voice breaking. You speak my language. I have been in this country for a week, and no one has spoken to me in my own tongue. Today I learned my son is very sick. He is back home and I cannot reach him because of the storms. I feel so alone. Daniel's heart clenched. He understood that loneliness, that helplessness of watching someone you love suffer while feeling powerless to help. He pulled the car over into a quiet parking lot and turned to face his passenger. In Arabic, he said, I am sorry for your son. I know this pain. My daughter is also very ill. For the next hour, the two men sat in that parked car, while the storm raged outside, speaking in the language of Daniel's grandmother, sharing their fears and hopes. The man's name was Khalid, and his son Rashid had collapsed during a football match back in Dubai. The doctors suspected a serious heart condition. Khalid had been in America for business meetings he could no longer focus on, desperate to get back home but stranded by canceled flights. Daniel told Khalid about Emma, about the leukemia that had stolen her childhood, about the nights he worked double shifts driving strangers, so she could have a chance at more birthdays, more laughter, more life. He spoke about the experimental treatment that could save her but remained impossibly out of reach. He shared things he had told no one, not even his ex-wife who had left when the medical bills became mountains. Khalid listened with an intensity that made Daniel feel truly heard for the first time in years. When Daniel finished speaking, Khalid placed his hand over his heart in a traditional gesture of deep respect. He said in Arabic, You are a good father. You have given me something precious tonight. You reminded me I am not alone in my suffering, and you gave me the gift of my language when I needed it most. This is Sadaqah. This is charity of the spirit. Daniel finally drove Khalid to his hotel. As they said goodbye, Khalid embraced him like a brother and pressed something into his hand. A business card. He said in English now, You have a kind soul, Daniel Martinez. The world needs more people like you. Daniel drove home through the empty streets, Khalid's card on the passenger seat. He thought about the strange comfort of that conversation, how sharing pain somehow made it lighter. He fell asleep that night thinking not about what he lacked, but about the unexpected human connection he had found. The next morning his doorbell rang at 8 o'clock. A man in a suit stood there with a briefcase and an envelope. Daniel's hands shook as he read the letter inside. It was from Khalid al-Rahman, and the words blurred as tears filled Daniel's eyes. The letter explained that Khalid was a sheikh and successful businessman who had made his fortune in telecommunications. He wrote that in Islam, when someone shows you unexpected kindness during your darkest hour, it is a sign from God to pass that kindness forward multiplied. Enclosed was a certified check for $500,000. Daniel collapsed onto his front steps, the paper trembling in his hands. The letter continued. Khalid wrote that $200,000 was for Emma's treatment with the best specialists in the world. Another $200,000 was for Daniel to restart his teaching career or any dream he had set aside. The final 100,000 was for Daniel to use as he saw fit, to help others as he had helped a stranger in pain. But there was more. Khalid's company was establishing a scholarship fund for children of immigrant families in Houston, and he wanted Daniel to help run it. He wrote, "You reminded me that language is not just words. It is the bridge between souls. You spoke to me in Arabic, yes, but more importantly, you spoke to me in the language of compassion. That language has no borders." The final line made Daniel openly weep. Khalid wrote that he had reached his son that morning, that Rashid would recover, and that the peace he found in talking with Daniel that night had given him strength to face the challenges ahead. "Your kindness saved more than you know." Daniel called the number on the card with shaking hands. When Khalid answered, Daniel could barely speak through his tears. "Why?" he asked. "Why such generosity?" Khalid's response was simple. "Because last night you saw a man in pain, and you stopped your own difficult journey to ease his burden. You shared your own struggles to lighten mine. You gave me the gift of my mother tongue when I was drowning in a sea of foreign words. That is not something money can buy, but it is something money can honor. In my faith, we believe that angels walk among us. Last night I met one driving an Uber. 3 months later, Emma began her treatment. 6 months after that, her cancer went into remission. Daniel started teaching again, this time at a program for refugee students where he used his Arabic and his story to help others find their voice in a new land. The scholarship fund helped 47 families in its first year. But the greatest change was in Daniel's heart. He learned that sometimes the smallest acts of human kindness, done without expectation of reward, create ripples that transform lives in ways we cannot imagine. Speaking a few words in Arabic to a suffering stranger had opened a door to miracles. On rainy nights, Daniel still drives sometimes, not for money anymore, but to remind himself that every passenger carries a story, every human heart knows pain, and every act of compassion matters more than we know. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to Pure Kindness Stories to remind yourself that in a world that often feels cold and disconnected, the warmth of human compassion can still change everything. Sometimes the greatest treasures we find are not the ones we seek, but the human connections we make along the way. Be kind, be present, be the light in someone's darkness. You never know whose life you might be saving, including your own.